Hi, and welcome to the Future of Dermatology podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Farah Kamangar, board certified dermatologist. We are here to talk about anything and everything dermatology related. You'll hear from me and my guests who are dermatologists, physicians, experts, scientists, residents, and medical students in the field of dermatology. We publish weekly, so if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button and show us some love, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to the Future of Dermatology podcast. Today's a very exciting episode. We have with us Dr. Raja Sivamani, who we all know very well at SF Derm because he was previously on the board with us for many years as well. And I know Raja from a long time ago, even back in medical school and throughout residency. And he was an attending at UC Davis when I was doing my residency. So I've just seen his amazing work and brilliant work over the years. And he is doing so many great things now and is in private practice and doing clinical research. And of course, has Learn Skin, which is an amazing platform for education. Also has a great podcast, doing so many things. So we have not even enough time probably to review in detail all of that. But thank you so much for joining us, Raja. And feel free to add anything to the bio.
Oh, Farah, you're too kind. It's hard to imagine how much time has passed since we first met. And sometimes you look back and you say, how the heck did that all happen? But I'm guessing a lot of the people that are listening to have had these sort of experiences. Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is that I have a deep dedication to integrative medicine. That's probably the thing that is the undercurrent for everything that I do. And so during residency, I also studied as an Ayurvedic practitioner, and that was a 2-year program. And learned a lot about herbs and herbal actions. And then from there, also mind-body techniques. And that kind of grew into this whole integrative medicine space. And I would say with everything that I do, that's kind of like the theme, is just to try to be integrative from an evidence-based perspective.
Now, that's fantastic. And I remember when we were residents, you were the only person giving us lectures on all topics, but then some topics in this field, which was very unique. And I think like the glimpses of that world that I had were from you and your expertise. So we were actually really lucky to have you as an attending when we were in our training. Not only for
that's very sweet of you to say,
also for like clinical research and all of that mentorship. And then I think last when I saw you, you were heavily in academic medicine.
Yeah.
Where I was training and of course doing like a lot of clinical work, a lot of clinical research, lots of mentoring. And then since then, there's obviously maybe like probably maybe much of the same work, but different area of doing that. So I'd love to just kind of hear from you, maybe a little bit about that transition from academics to private practice.
Going through medical school and especially after residency, I've always seen myself as wanting to be in research. And I think what you are taught, and I've learned now that there are some conceptions and misconceptions that happen with any sort of area of work or what you think you can do. But I thought, okay, the only way that I can do research is through academics. And to be honest, I stayed on at UC Davis and I loved it. I loved being there. I loved being around just that energy of research. Also just the energy of this thought of, hey, let's try to innovate and let's try to push the horizons. And, I went in thinking basic science, actually. And it was a very weird kind of internal battle because I knew I loved clinic. And, the basic science model was you do clinic maybe 1 day a week and you're in the basic science, you're in the lab the rest of the time. And I was looking at sebocyte biology and acne. But I quickly started to realize that I really, really got energized by seeing patients. And the other part of it is, as I finished medical school, gosh, so many patients would ask about nutrition and literally we get almost zero training. And at UC Davis, which is like the #1 powerhouse for nutrition, we still got almost nothing for nutrition. And so I started asking people, hey, did you get training on nutrition? Nope. And so I can tell you what the clinical signs of pellagra are, but if you ask me, is a ketogenic diet going to help me become healthier and lose weight? I'd have to look it up on PubMed. I have no medical student notes to fall back on. So that really was, I would say, a huge trigger for me to say, okay, I think I want to do something different here. And I really want to focus in on clinical medicine. So I ended up at Davis. And I did that. I was on the IRB committee for a while, which really opened my eyes to how research was done. And we kind of flipped over into running a lot of clinical trials and looking at things like nutrition, and started making some inroads with, we did our very first early nutritional study was on almonds and wrinkles. And it kind of just opened the floodgates for me to say, hey, wait a minute. There is a whole world out there that isn't pharmaceutical where you can still do studies. And I did a lot of cosmeceutical studies. We did the study on bakuchiol against retinol. And then that's what really like started putting bakuchiol out there. And, Farah, it just opened my eyes to the fact that research doesn't have to be pharmaceutical. It doesn't have to be focused on just maybe the classic approaches. You can still use that same model, but you can expand the way you treat patients and whatnot. So yeah, I was in academics originally, and then came the transition 5 years ago to move on from there.
Yeah, and like what was the trigger for that, I guess? Because I think a lot of people are like pretty
Yeah.
all of these different settings.
Yeah.
So to get that inertia to make a change like that, because I don't think
Yeah.
you're really unhappy in any derm setting. It's sort of like, what would be your optimal happiness? But to go from like, I don't know, like 90% to your 100%, it's hard for a lot of people, but there's many that mindset with, they know it's not the perfect fit, but it's like pretty good. So I guess it's sort of like, what made you kind of make that decision? Like, we're going to go for it.
Well, I think the toughest pill to swallow was I'd always thought that the best innovation occurred at the universities, until I came to the realization that that's not true. That you can innovate in a university, but you also have to fight through a lot of red tape. And like, for example, if I wanted to bring a clinical study on, going through an IRB review would take a couple of months. I mean, now when I do an IRB review, it's done in a week, and we've got the study off the ground in like 2 weeks.
Wow.
And, it's just very, very different. And I think the innovation is ultimately, wasn't that I was unhappy, but I could see that I had a ceiling on what I would be able to innovate. And so when we started Learn Skin, which was a platform to really, talk about education, right? You think education's in the universities, but to really innovate around education, it's easier in the privatized world, because you're able to make more nimble decisions, follow through on, whether something was working out or not, and then make changes in a nimble way. That ultimately was one of the reasons that I actually left the university. And I remember having the conversation as I was leaving. I said, it has nothing to do with UC Davis not being a great place, but they would take so much IP on everything that we were doing that I just needed that freedom. And the second thing, which is just mind-blowing, I know UC Davis has a commitment to seeing as many people as possible, but they really struggle to get in the Medicaid, which is Medi-Cal in California, the Medi-Cal patients. Yeah. And so we decided to join a practice that was already seeing Medi-Cal. It was myself and Dr. Cindy Chambers. By the way, just as a side note, there's no way I could have done this without her. I mean,
Cindy's fantastic.
I had to do this with her. Every single company and every single thing that I've built now has been with her. Oh. And so it's just one of those things where, we're kind of connected at the hip at this point. But it was really nice because you had someone else that you could do it with. And I think that's a big deal. And I kind of developed a friendship that's just, been able to like go in so many different directions. And it's just a big deal.
That's such a good point, actually. Like, it's good to have, you kind of need that support, someone who gets it. You can bounce ideas off of each other. And it's, I guess, like, I'm just going to make it a question here. If you thought like the top, like, few things you had to have if you're trying to go into private practice, because a lot of people, that's intimidating to them too. That's an area that we don't get a lot of training in, coming out of residency. And traditionally, I think people just did that, and it was innate, like in the 80s and 90s, it just went out and started private practice. Now almost nobody does that. So then it just is almost like, I'll say fear, but whatever the word is, just that hesitancy. It's just, not what everyone's doing. So you're thinking, well, there's probably a reason. So I guess, what are like the few things you think were absolutely necessary in doing that? And also, if you want to talk about it, did you guys join a practice that was already kind of formed?
Yeah.
Would you venture out and start a brand new practice, things like that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think one of them is someone that is going to be in the trenches with you, if you can do that instead of doing it solo. And secondly, realizing that you don't, not that you can do it alone, you don't want to do it alone. So, we could have started a practice from scratch, but because we joined Dr. Yen, An Yen was already a faculty member at Davis, we were able to go and build off of an infrastructure that was there, and we really enhanced that practice. But gosh, if we had to start from scratch and get every contract from scratch, we would have probably spent 2 or 3 years to get to just the launching point that we had when we joined a practice.
Yeah.
The other part of it is to have someone that you can trust that's non-medical that can do all the admin stuff and the HR stuff for you. And so we were lucky because Dr. Yen's son was part of the practice. And in a way, because he was so closely tied to the practice, either it was going to be horrible or it was going to be amazing. Because either we couldn't get rid of the guy or we knew he wouldn't leave. And at the end of the day, he's turned out to be amazing. And so I think the three things that I think four things I have to say. One is that you there's no way you can plan for the entire pathway. You can't. You have to take a leap of faith knowing that that's the only, you can't take a step knowing that there's solid ground. You take a step hoping that solid ground rises above you. And if it doesn't, then you quickly figure out where the solid ground is and then put the next foot forward. That's the first thing.
That's a great way of putting it. And as a dermatologist, you can always, there's so many options still. You can't really fail. Almost.
You can't really fail. But I think in medicine, we are so used to control that I guess you kind of have to relinquish that a little bit. And then I think having a partner that you can really just bounce every single idea off of, if you can find an older, I wouldn't say necessarily a mentor, but at least in our case, Dr. Yen, having had a practice that was already present, kind of knew the ropes a little bit, then you're not learning everything from scratch. That's another one. And then having someone that can help you think through all those things that we never learned in medical school, like the business part of things, and you'll learn it. But I think if you start something from scratch, it's a lot harder. So I think that was that. And then, but the biggest one is being able to have a partner that's willing to also take risks with you, knowing that you probably will lose money here. You'll probably have something that didn't work out there. But at the end of the day, it was still worth it, because it was the experience. So I think with that, when we moved to the practice, it was so Medi-Cal. We see 60 to 70% Medi-Cal. So
access is,
oh my gosh, no, it was amazing. And then, part of it was that, we started the clinical trials unit privately. And I have to say that was the most mind-blowing thing. That's when I learned that you can do clinical trials ultra efficiently. And you know what I struggled with, Farah? I actually asked people to try to help me figure out how to start the clinical trials unit, but it was a little bit nebulous. And so that I think was the hardest thing to do. And we started that one from scratch. But because we had a practice that was already successful, being able to recruit patients was a lot easier. And as we've grown, now we run about 30 studies every year. We do half pharmaceutical, half nutrition. It also microbiome, we do a lot of sequencing work. We do a lot of all that basic science stuff that I wanted to do, all those clinical investigator questions that I wanted to do. We're doing them now. But we're doing them outside the university, and we have no problem getting the funding, and we can internally fund them just based off of whatever revenue we're getting in from the other studies. And we have medical students. Every year I have 2 to 3 medical students started with me, and we just publish. Here's the most mind-blowing thing, even though I said mind-blowing before, this is blowing your mind again a second time. We publish at a faster rate than I ever published at the university.
Oh, wow.
It's just nuts.
Yeah, that's not what you would think would be. Yeah, and even when you said you have 30 trials going in a year, those are not numbers you see in academic center either. It's just probably because of all those things, you have to wait a few months for each one to get approved.
Right.
All these different pieces. It's really just super efficient how you're doing it, and then just being able to do it exactly how you kind of see fit as well. And I'm curious, do you have a guesstimate, how much staff does it take to run that, a 30 study a year type of?
We have about 10 clinical coordinators.
Oh, wow.
And
big operation.
Yeah, and we have one full-time study doctor that helps with all the evaluations. And we have 2 people that oversee like the pharma studies and one that oversees the non-pharma studies. And then on top of it, you also have another group that helps with invoicing and HR. And so, yeah, I would say all in all, with like independent contractors and with employees, probably there's about 15 of us that, do it all together. And we have 3 PIs too, just because we have some that are peds derm and another one that's just dermatology. Cindy is a derm, and then Jennifer Ornelas, who was one of my medical students that kind of stuck with me the whole time, and now she's a peds derm in our practice, and now she runs studies, and it's just amazing. It's just like a family that I grew up with. I mean, this is my family, and it's pretty amazing.
That is so great. And I have to ask you the nitty gritty. So you mentioned like maybe 60-70% Medi-Cal patients, which is fantastic to offer that kind of access. And I'm curious, like in bigger institutions, there's also these kind of misconceptions that like, well, maybe the Medi-Cal or Medicare population is going to be like less reimbursement, and then that's bad business. Whereas you guys are just, I mean, part of it is public service, and your team is just people who like to do good work. I'm sure that's part of it. But how do you find that business-wise? Do you find that sustainable? Have you guys joined like one of those IPAs otherwise where you're getting, so just the logistics of how you do the business part of clinical, without, not the clinical research, but just like clinical.
Yeah, in California, straight Medi-Cal does not reimburse well at all. However, on the other side, a lot of plans have now gone into managed Medi-Cal plans where they'll give you like reasonable rates. It's still not going to be like the private payers. But one of the advantages we have is because we do so many clinical studies, we're able to recruit a lot of these patients into studies as well. And we also find that the Medi-Cal population is super thankful. A lot of them are exceptionally thankful. And there's another thing in here, Farah, that I just probably didn't appreciate. When I was thinking about private practice, a lot of people in academics said, oh, you're just going to pop pimples. That's not true. I actually see more complicated patients now than I did at the academic center. Because, we're seeing people that didn't get access, people that are refugees from like Ukraine, or they're refugees from Afghanistan, or, they're like the underserved population that just didn't get access, took them 8 months just to get in to see a dermatologist. And so, and also when you look at like the skin of color and the diversity that we see and the different kind of clinical presentations, there is not a day that goes by. We have 14 practitioners in our clinic now. There's not a day that goes by where I'll get a question about something. I'm like, gosh, I read about this in a textbook and we probably never see it again. And we have a lot of those, we'll never see it again. That happens like on a weekly basis. And so I think dermatology, you can see cool stuff everywhere.
Yeah. Well,
but to go back to what you're saying, the Medi-Cal, we make it work because we see patients at a faster rate. So there's a little bit of the just volume. And then also we're able to recruit into our clinical trials, which helps to kind of bridge the gap.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. You guys have such a great setup. And then I have to ask about Learn Skin. You guys are doing so many great things with that. Anything with that coming out? I know you guys do, is it the annual conference?
Yeah, so Learn Skin, just as a primer, it's an online platform. It was really developed by Vinita Sivamani, and then it was her, myself, and then Dr. Hadar Levtov. We were all sitting around, his dinner table, and then then Vinita pointed out, because she's got an MBA, she said, "You guys don't make education as cool as it could be," and so that's where she started to innovate and said, "Hey, why don't we deploy the education online and make it easy for people to access?" And then that grew into an in-person conference where the underpinning of Learn Skin is basically we try to present all the evidence that's there, but we also have an integrative spin on everything. So while you'll find CMEs on things like vitiligo, HS, psoriasis, some of those lectures are going to be like the microbiome or the role of nutrition, or maybe what's the role of mind-body interventions, So that's what comes up. And then the real big thing that we also have on top of it is that now we have the Integrative Dermatology Symposium that's annual. And the last one we had like 1,000 people that showed up, and because it's hybrid. And it's and the keynote speaker had nothing to do with dermatology. He was talking about how to impact insulin resistance, which has obviously much bigger implications in human health, but of course, acne, HS, a lot of conditions, you have issues with like insulin resistance. So we've kind of bridged into a scenario where I really hope it's going to change the way people think about medicine and realize that nutrition and how your lifestyle is just as core as whatever the latest topical is that you're going to use, or the latest, JAK inhibitor, or whatever the biologic is that you want to do.
Yeah, it's so easy to just ignore the whole picture and just be like, put this cream on it. But there's all this other stuff going on.
Oh, I should say this too, Farah. We've already had a training program going on for dermatologists if they want to take an intensive 9-month program to really learn integrative medicine. Because let's be honest, you don't learn a lot of this in residency. You don't. And then we're also doing it for physician assistants and NPs as well, because we know they're an important part of the landscape, and we want to get them up to speed as well.
Well, that's so fantastic. And then, so this is the Future of Dermatology podcast. So we always finish by asking kind of what thoughts on the future. But before I do that, do almonds decrease wrinkles?
Yeah, you know what? I'll tell you what. Almonds, a handful of almonds in postmenopausal women decrease wrinkles by more than 10% over 6 months. Not only that, we're now running a study to see if it increases collagen. Half a mango, an atulfo mango, those yellow mangoes, that reduces wrinkles. And then if you take soy protein extract with soy isoflavones, that will reduce wrinkles and also improve collagen synthesis. So
delicious.
These are the kind of studies that we're doing, Far. I'm telling you, it's crazy. If someone told me 5 years ago we'd be doing these studies, I would have said like, wow, I'd be in my personal Disneyland.
That just sounds like a delicious smoothie right there. And so I'm gonna go make that tomorrow morning. That's what
Yeah, right.
So we'll finish with what do you think are the top things, or the one thing that you see in Future of Dermatology changing? I think the field is changing pretty rapidly. Yeah. What do you think is like one of the top things?
Truly keep an open mind, because I think what's going to happen is AI is going to come, and I don't think it's going to replace us. I think it's just going to make our job easier. We shouldn't fear technology. We should take it on. And then there's a lot of other professionals out there that want to work together. We have naturopathic doctors that work with us now. The fact that dermatology is now evolving into all these new pharmaceuticals, but then a lot of patients are asking about, lifestyle approaches. I think have an open mind, but not only that, our evidence is probably always like that. Think about how many case reports we use to try to make the next decision. So our evidence is always evolving. So just don't think you learned everything in medical school, and don't think you learned everything in residency. There's a lot more to come, and I am super excited, because I do think that if you keep an innovative mindset and you really want to go do something, don't let people tell you that you can't do it, or don't think that, hey, I'm, for example, in academics and I want to go achieve this. Just go do it, because 10 years from now, you don't want to wonder, like, should I have given it a shot? Because guess what? The academic job's still going to be available.
That's true.
So
that's actually
keep that in mind.
That's really great advice. Yeah, those are the two things, right? It's like AI won't replace you, but people using AI will. And two, academic jobs and multi-specialty practices will always want you. So those will
always want you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Raja. It's been so
Of course. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to spend some time with you.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you for listening to the Future of Dermatology podcast. Remember to hit that subscribe button and share the podcast with your friends. The more you share and subscribe, the more we'll be able to grow and share our dermatology knowledge. If you have burning dermatology questions, feel free to leave them in the comment below, and we would love to address them in a future episode. And please note that this podcast is not intended to substitute for medical advice from your doctor.